Has a cop ever arrested you for absolutely no reason? I was parked in my own driveway on a Tuesday morning eating a bagel before work when a patrol car pulled up right behind me and hit the lights. I wasn't even moving. The car was in park. Engine was running because I had the AC on. That's it. Officer Briggs got out of his cruiser like he just caught America's Most Wanted. Hand on his belt, chest puffed out, sunglasses on even though it was barely light outside. He walked up to my window and knocked on it with his knuckle like he was trying to crack the glass. I rolled it down and said, "Good morning." He looked at me, looked at my house, looked back at me, and I could see it. That little shift behind his eyes, that recalculation, like he was looking at me and looking at this house and deciding those two things didn't go together. He said, "Step out of the vehicle." I asked why. He said, "I'm not going to ask you again." So I got out. I had my work badge around my neck, my lunch bag on the passenger seat, and cream cheese on my thumb. I work in IT for the county. I've lived in that house for 6 years, paid for it myself. But I already knew none of that mattered because Briggs wasn't looking at a homeowner eating breakfast. He was looking at a black man sitting in a car in a neighborhood he'd already decided I didn't belong in. Briggs told me the vehicle matched the description of one involved in a robbery last night. I told him this was my car, registered to me, parked in my driveway, at my house. He said, "That's what they all say." I asked if I could show him my registration. He said, "Don't reach for anything." I said, "It's in the glove box." He said, "I told you not to reach." I wasn't reaching. My hands were completely visible. I was standing outside my own car in my own driveway wearing khakis and a polo shirt, and this man was talking to me like I had a weapon drawn. Briggs called for backup, like I was dangerous. I'm 5'8", and I was holding a half-eaten bagel. His partner showed up about 10 minutes later, Officer Dominguez. She got out, looked at me, looked at the house, looked at the name on the mailbox, and you could see it on her face immediately. She knew. She walked over and asked Briggs what was going on. He said I was being uncooperative, and the vehicle matched a description. She asked me for my ID. I gave it to her. She ran it right there, clean. She told Briggs the car was registered to me. Address matched, nothing on file. Briggs didn't even blink. He said he still wasn't satisfied and wanted to search the vehicle. I said no. He said refusing a search made me look suspicious. I said it made me look like someone who knew his rights. That's when his whole face changed. He stepped toward me and said, "You think you're smart. I've been doing this for 12 years. I know when something doesn't fit, and you don't fit." He actually said that. "You don't fit." Standing in front of my house with my name on the mortgage and my car in the driveway, and the man told me I didn't fit. Dominguez told him to let it go. He ignored her. He told me to put my hands on the hood of my car. My neighbor Linda was outside watering her garden. She stopped and watched the whole thing, didn't say a word. I'd waved to that woman every morning for 4 years. Briggs cuffed me in my own driveway, put me in the back of his cruiser, and drove me to the station. He booked me on suspicion of involvement in an armed robbery at a gas station the night before. Sat me in a holding room for 3 hours. Nobody read me anything. Nobody explained anything. I just sat there in my work clothes, still smelling like cream cheese, staring at a gray wall. Finally, a sergeant came in. Aldridge. He asked me to walk him through what happened. I told him everything. He asked where I was the previous night. I told him I was at my buddy Ray's house watching the game. Got home around 11. Went to bed. Ray would confirm that if anyone asked. We'd been watching basketball and eating wings, and I'd left his place at 10:45 because I had work the next morning. The most boring alibi in the world, because that's what my life looks like. He wrote it down and left. About an hour later, Aldridge came back with a look on his face like he was choosing his words very carefully. He told me I was free to go. No charges, no apology either. Just free to go like I'd been held as a favor, and they were generously letting me return to my own life. He said there had been a miscommunication. I asked, what miscommunication? He said the suspect from the robbery was described as a white male in his 40s, driving a black SUV. I'm 29. I drive a dark blue sedan. I am not white. Briggs didn't have the wrong guy because of a bad description. He had the wrong guy because he never even looked at the description. He saw a black man in a neighborhood that's mostly white and made his decision before he even turned on his lights. But here's where it gets good. I didn't go to the press. I didn't make a scene. I just went home and went to work the next day. What I found out later from Dominguez, who actually came to my door about 2 weeks after and apologized to my face, was that Briggs had written in his report that I was parked on the street, not in a driveway. He wrote that I became verbally aggressive and refused to identify myself. He wrote that the vehicle was a black SUV consistent with the description from dispatch. He wrote that the suspect described was a black male in his late 20s. Every single word of it was invented. He didn't just lie about what happened. He went back and changed the description of the suspect to match me instead of the actual person they were looking for. Dominguez told me she had flagged the report with Internal Affairs because nothing in it matched what she witnessed. She said she'd written her own account the night of the incident and submitted it separately because she knew the moment she read Briggs's version that he'd rewritten reality. She said she wanted me to know because she couldn't live with what Briggs had done, and she couldn't fix it from inside without someone on the outside pushing. She also told told me something that made my stomach turn. She said, when she confronted Briggs about the report at the station, he laughed. He told her it was standard practice. He said everybody adjusts reports to match the outcome and that she'd learn that eventually. She said she told him this wasn't adjusting. This was fabrication. He said she was being dramatic and that the guy, meaning me, would forget about it in a week. I thanked her. I told her I appreciated her coming to tell me and that it took courage. Then I asked her one question. How many times has he done this before? She looked at me for a long time. Then she said, I can't answer that. But the way she said it answered it. So I got to work. Not angry work, not emotional work, methodical work. I work in IT for the county, which means I spend my days inside systems, databases, records, logs. I know how information is stored, and I know how to find it when someone tries to bury it. I didn't touch anything I wasn't supposed to. I didn't access police records or sealed files or anything that would compromise what I was building. Everything I used was publicly available. I just knew where to look. The first thing I did was file a formal complaint with the department's Internal Affairs Division. I typed it up at my kitchen table that same night Dominguez came to see me. 4 pages. Single, spaced. Every detail I could remember from the moment Briggs pulled up behind me to the moment Aldridge told me I was free to go. I included the time I left my house that morning. The time Briggs arrived based on my car's dash cam, which had been running the entire time because I leave it on whenever the engine is on. That's right. I had dash cam footage. Front and rear. The front camera caught Briggs walking up. The rear camera caught his cruiser pulling in behind me while I was clearly parked in my own driveway. Not on the street like his report claimed. The audio picked up the entire conversation. Every word. His knock on the window. My good morning. His step out of the vehicle. My asking why. All of it. Including the part where he said, you don't fit. I downloaded the footage that night and saved it to 3 separate drives. One at home, one at work, one in a safe deposit box at my bank. Because I've seen enough of these situations to know that evidence has a way of disappearing when the wrong people feel threatened. Then I pulled the dispatch logs for that morning. Public record. I requested them through the county clerk's office using the same process any citizen can use. It took 5 business days. When I got them, I sat at my kitchen table and read them twice. The dispatch call that went out that morning referenced the gas station robbery from the night before. The suspect description in the log was clear. White male, approximately 40 to 45 years old, 6'1", driving a black Chevrolet Tahoe, last seen heading north on Route 9. My description, 29 years old, 5'8", black male, dark blue Honda sedan, parked in a driveway heading nowhere. There was not a single overlapping detail between me and the suspect. Not one. The dispatch log proved that Briggs either never read the description or read it and ignored it entirely. Either way, his report was fabricated. I also pulled Briggs's service record. Also, public record through the department's transparency portal, which the city had launched 2 years earlier after a different incident that made the local news. Briggs had been on the force for 12 years, just like he told me that morning in my driveway, with his chest puffed out like his tenure was supposed to impress me. In that time, he'd had 9 formal complaints filed against him. 9. 5 of them were for excessive use of authority during traffic stops. The details in those complaints read like variations of my morning. A man pulled over for a broken taillight who ended up face down on the pavement. A woman asked to step out of her car during a routine registration check who was handcuffed when she asked why. A teenager stopped on his bicycle 3 blocks from his house because he matched a vague description that could have applied to half the population. 2 complaints were for filing inaccurate reports. 1 was for conducting an unlawful search of a vehicle after the driver explicitly refused consent. 1 was for using racially charged language during an arrest. The language was redacted in the public file, but the complaint was there. Of those 9 complaints, 8 had been investigated internally and closed with no disciplinary action, no suspension, no retraining, no note in his file that meant anything to anyone, just closed. The 9th was still pending when he pulled up behind me eating my bagel. 9 complaints in 12 years, and the man was still on patrol every morning making the same decisions about who belonged where. I compiled everything: the dash cam footage, the dispatch logs, the original suspect description, Briggs's fabricated report, Dominguez's separate account, which she had given me a copy of with her written permission, Briggs's complaint history, my formal complaint, my work records showing I was at my desk by 9:15 every day that week, except Tuesday when I was sitting in a holding room, my buddy Ray's statement confirming I was at his house the night of the robbery. I put it all in a folder, a real folder, organized with tabs and labels because I'm the kind of person who organizes things. Then I found a lawyer. His name was Holt, civil rights attorney with a small firm downtown. I found him through a co-worker whose cousin had dealt with something similar 2 years earlier in the next county over. Holt had handled cases like mine before, not big national cases, local ones, the kind that never make the news because the departments settle quietly and everyone moves on and the officer shows up for his next shift like nothing happened. I sat in Holt's office on a Wednesday evening after work and put the folder on his desk. I told him the whole whole story from the beginning. The bagel, the driveway, the cuffs, the holding room, the fabricated report, the dispatch logs, all of it. He listened without interrupting. When I was done, he opened the folder and spent about an hour going through it page by page. He held the dash cam footage up on his laptop and watched it twice. When he was done, he closed the folder and looked at me and said, "This is one of the most documented cases of falsified police reporting I've ever seen. Most people don't have dash cam footage. Most people don't know how to pull dispatch logs. Most people don't think to check the officer's complaint history. Most people are so shaken by the experience that they just want to move on. You handed me a case that's already built. We filed a civil rights complaint with the county. Not a lawsuit yet. A formal complaint through the Civilian Oversight Board. Holt said we should start there because if the board acted properly, it would create a paper trail that strengthened any future legal action. The board had 60 days to investigate. In the meantime, I went back to my life. I went to work. I ate my bagel in the driveway every morning because that's my routine, and no one was going to take it from me. But I'd be lying if I said nothing changed. The first morning after the arrest, I sat in that driveway and my hands were shaking. Not because I was scared of Briggs coming back, because my body remembered the cuffs. It remembered the feeling of cold metal on my wrists in my own driveway at 7 in the morning while my neighbor watched and said nothing. It took about 2 weeks before I could sit in that car without checking my rearview mirror every 30 seconds. Every time a patrol car drove down my street, I felt my chest tighten. I'd watch it pass and wait for the lights. They never came on, but my body didn't know that. My body was still standing on the hood of my car being told I didn't fit. I didn't tell anyone at work what happened except my manager because I needed to explain why I was 3 hours late that Tuesday. She looked at me like she wanted to say something meaningful and then just said, "Take whatever time you need." I said, "I don't need time. I need to work." So I worked, and I built my case. My neighbor Linda still watered her garden. She still didn't say anything to me. For 3 weeks straight, I walked to my car every morning, and she was out there with her hose and her silence. About 3 weeks after I filed the complaint, I got a knock on my door on a Saturday morning. It was Linda. She stood on my porch holding a plate of cookies and looking like she'd been thinking about what to say for days. She said I saw what happened that morning with the officer. I said, "I know you did." She said, "I should have said something. I should have told him you lived here, that you're my neighbor, that I see you leave for work every morning." I said, "Yes, you should have." She started to tear up. She said I was scared. I didn't know what to do. I looked at her standing there with her cookies and her guilt, and I thought about all the people who watch things happen and say nothing because saying something feels too hard. I said, "Linda, I appreciate you coming over here, but what scared you that morning is what I live with every day. You got to choose whether to be involved." I didn't. She nodded. She left the cookies. I ate them because they were good cookies, and I'm not petty about baked goods. The Civilian Oversight Board completed their investigation in 43 days, 17 days ahead of schedule. The findings were exactly what the evidence showed, and there was no room for interpretation because the dash cam footage didn't leave any. Officer Briggs had conducted an unlawful stop of a citizen who was parked in his own driveway with no moving violation and no reasonable suspicion. He had detained and arrested a citizen without probable cause. He had fabricated multiple details in his incident report, including the suspect description, the location of my vehicle, my behavior during the encounter, and the type of vehicle I was driving. He had ignored his partner's verbal advisement to release me, and he had done all of this to a man who did not match a single element of the actual suspect description that dispatch had broadcast that morning. The board recommended termination, not suspension, not desk duty, not mandatory retraining with a return to full duty in 6 weeks. Termination. They also recommended a referral to the district attorney's office for potential criminal charges related to the falsified report, because filing a false police report isn't just a department policy violation. It's a crime. The same crime a civilian would be charged with if they did it. The only difference is that when a civilian lies on a police report, they get arrested. When an officer does it, they get a grievance hearing and a union representative. The department fought it. Of course they did. The police union filed a grievance on Briggs's behalf. They argued the dashcam footage was inconclusive, which was interesting because you could literally hear every word of the conversation in crystal clear audio. They argued that my formal complaint was retaliatory, which made no sense because retaliatory against what? They argued that Briggs had acted in good faith based on his experience and training. His experience. 12 years of 9 complaints and a pattern of targeting black men during routine stops. That was his experience. Holt filed the lawsuit 3 days after the union grievance. We went federal. Section 1983, civil rights violation, unlawful arrest, falsified reporting, racial profiling. We named Briggs individually and the department for failure to supervise given his documented complaint history. The department's lawyer called Holt and offered a settlement within 2 weeks. $50,000. No admission of wrongdoing. Sealed agreement. Holt told me about the offer over coffee. I said no. He said, "Are you sure?" I said, "I didn't do all of this to take a check and a non-disclosure. I did it because a man decided I didn't belong in my own driveway and then lied about it to cover cover himself, and I want that on the record where everyone can see it. Holt smiled and said, I was hoping you'd say that. The case went to mediation 4 months later. By then, the department had suspended Briggs with pay pending the outcome, which meant taxpayers were still paying his salary while he sat at home. At mediation, the department's attorney laid out their position, which was essentially that Briggs made an honest mistake based on incomplete information, and that the department had already taken corrective action by suspending him and reviewing their protocols. Honest mistake. The man rewrote a suspect description to change the race from white to black so it would match the person he'd arrested. That's not a mistake. That's a decision made at a desk after the fact to protect himself. Holt laid out ours. He started with the dashcam footage and played it on a screen in the mediation room. Nobody spoke for 7 minutes while it ran. You could hear my good morning. You could hear Briggs say, I'm not going to ask you again. You could hear Dominguez tell him the car was registered to me. You could hear him say, you don't fit. Then Holt showed the dispatch logs showing the real suspect description side by side with what Briggs wrote in his report. White male in his 40s became black male in his late 20s. Black SUV became dark blue sedan that Briggs relabeled as a black SUV. Parked in a driveway became parked on the street. Cooperative citizen became verbally aggressive. Holt put Briggs's 9 prior complaints on the table. He put Dominguez's separate account next to them. He put the Civilian Oversight Board's findings recommending termination on top of the stack. The mediator looked at everything for about 45 minutes. She took notes. She asked the department's attorney 2 questions that I couldn't hear. Then she looked at him and said, this isn't a mediation case. This is a liability case. Either you resolve this properly, or this goes to trial, and that footage plays in open court in front of a jury and the local press. The room got very quiet. The department settled, not for $50,000, for $175,000. Full admission of misconduct by Briggs, no non-disclosure. The settlement was public record. Anyone could look it up. Anyone could read exactly what happened in my driveway that Tuesday morning and what Briggs did afterward to cover it up. The department agreed to mandatory dashcam and body cam review for all patrol officers on every stop. They agreed to implement an early warning system that flagged officers with 3 or more complaints within a 5-year period for mandatory review and intervention. They agreed to fund implicit bias training administered by an outside firm not chosen by the department. They agreed to publish an annual transparency report detailing complaint statistics broken down by the race of the person who filed the complaint. And Briggs was terminated. Not retired early with a pension and a handshake. Not transferred to another precinct to be someone else's problem. Terminated with cause. His badge, his gun, his authority to walk up to someone's car and decide they didn't belong. All of it gone. His falsified report was referred to the district attorney who charged him with filing a false instrument. He pled down to a misdemeanor. Lost his certification. Can never work in law enforcement again in the state. Dominguez got promoted 6 months later. She's a sergeant now. She runs the community liaison unit, which didn't exist before my case. The department created it as part of the settlement agreement. I see her sometimes at county meetings because my IT department supports the systems the liaison unit uses. We nod at each other across the room. We don't need to say anything. She did the right thing when it mattered, and that's enough. Linda put up a security camera on her porch about a month after everything settled. She told me it was for package theft, but I noticed it points directly at my driveway. I think that's her way of saying what she couldn't say that morning. It's not enough, but it's something. I used part of the settlement money to pay off my mortgage. The rest I put into a fund that provides dash cams to people in the community who can't afford them. $60 cameras. That's all it takes. $60 and a memory card, and suddenly it's not just your word against someone who has a badge and a report he can rewrite. I've given out about 40 of them so far. I still eat my bagel in the driveway every morning. Same spot, same routine, engine running, a C on. Sometimes I think about Briggs sitting in his cruiser that morning deciding I didn't fit. I think about how many other mornings he made that same decision about someone else who didn't have a dash cam running, or know how to pull dispatch records, or have the energy to fight a system designed to exhaust you. I think about the 8 complaints before mine that went nowhere. 8 people who tried and got nothing. I was number 9, and the only difference was evidence. That's it. Not that I was more wronged, not that my story was worse. I just had receipts.